It appears the divorcee, Sam Seder, the overweight Joy Reid, and the bartender, AOC, are suddenly worried about young black men having their lives ended prematurely. They all had autistic fits over a thug named Jordan Neely finally picking on someone his own size. He was used to beating up children and the elderly. This time there were some fit adult men, and the intimidation tactics and mentally ill hysterics that worked when he was beating up little children and old people no longer worked. Working off what I did in a previous video, I calculated a murder victimization rate for children in Democrat dunghole St. Louis. Let us go further with that and focus on some other diverse Democrat-run dungholes. Jordan Neely was not a child. Even Sam Seder's not a child. He's a man-child, bipolar man-child. Jordan Neely was not a child, but we'll focus on children because it really hits home. As I said earlier, St. Louis had a juvenile murder victimization rate of 66.393 per 100,000. For you Democrats listening, and most of the homicide in St. Louis is overwhelmingly black on black. So in St. Louis City, oh, you Democrats are so funny. Young black men, young juveniles, I should say, 66.393 per 100,000 murder victimization rate. So if you're a young black male in St. Louis, your biggest enemy is other black males. How about Baltimore? And this whole transcript will be at Rumble. I'm not going to read all this off, but what I got for Baltimore, from 2020 to 2022, they had a juvenile homicide victimization rate of 16.048 per 100,000. So, young black people in Baltimore are dying, getting murdered at a high rate, and the people doing it to them are other black people. Like Jordan Neely, for example. Just for some clarity, this is some FBI data. Fortunately, the FBI has a 10 and under age category, and then 11 to 15, then it jumps to 16 to 20. So this comparison does not exactly jive. But according to the FBI, there were 900 children 15 years of age and younger murdered in 2021. So, Now, those don't count, especially if they're black and they weren't murdered by a white person on the subway. So that doesn't matter. If you go to another FBI page, you will see that 2,178 people 19 years of age and younger were murdered in 2021. Just some food for thought. How about Chicago? What do you think it is in Chicago? According to the Chicago Sun-Times, 184 children were murdered in Chicago 2020 to 2022. They have a juvenile murder victimization rate, and again, most of the homicide in Chicago is black on black. Juvenile murder victimization rate in Chicago is 11.081 per 100,000. Not bad, but I doubt Sam Seder, the bartender, or Joy Reid will flap their teeth about it. Those kids can't be used as political pawns, so they're useless. For what it's worth, from 2018 to 2022, there were 214 black children murdered in Chicago, almost 43 per year. Jordan Neely was not a child. He was 30 years old, and the number of black people 30 years of age and younger that were murdered in Chicago from 2018 to 2022. Listen to this. The number of black people 30 years of age and younger that were murdered in Chicago from 2018 to 2022 was 1,561. I have all the links, and unlike Sam Seder, I actually have sources. Or Joy Reid just talking out her butt, saying, oh, why is this? I don't have any evidence for it, but why is this true? I doubt Sam Seder will have an autistic fit about those black people that were murdered in the Windy City because they're not politically expedient. They are worthless to the old man. I should mention that a lot of them were probably gangbanger hood rats, just getting a receipt from another dysfunctional fatherless child. But some of them, and if you read through what Chicago Sun-Times has, they do chronicle a lot of this, the articles on it. Some of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and took a bullet in a drive-by shooting where someone else was the intended target. But again, those don't count. Those don't count. Now we turn to one of America's most dangerous cities, Flint, Michigan. I profiled it before in my essays on murder in America. So, what I got for Flint was their juvenile murder. I'm scrolling down here. I've got a lot of data, but I'm just cutting to the chase. My gosh. Juvenile murder victimization rate in Flint was 23.030. You get that? 23.030 per 100,000. Juvenile. So if you're a young black male or a young person in Flint, which is uber Democrat inside an uber Democrat county, there's a lot of those around America. Michigan's got a lot of very pro-Trump counties, pro-Republican counties. And then they've got places like Flint, Pontiac, and Detroit, and Saginaw. And if you're a young person in Flint, particularly a young black male, if you're going to get murdered, it's probably another young person doing it. Another black person under 40. So young children, as opposed to old children are getting murdered in Flint at a staggering rate. But they don't care. 23.030 per 100,000. In other words, there are a lot of young black folks being murdered in Flint, Michigan, a city that has a history of violence, most of it being black on black in a state, as I mentioned. Michigan, that is notorious for black on black violence. The main culprits, as I mentioned, Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, Grand Rapids, and Pontiac. There's a few others in there too. Joy Reid, the divorcee, Sam Seder, and the bartender will not cry for them, will they? But they will cry for a thug who assaulted and terrorized the elderly and children, getting arrested 42 times. They did not cry for his victims, but they did have an autistic fit when he picked on the wrong Marine. Facebloat Sam Seder, the overweight Joy Reid, and AOC don't give a twit about young kids being murdered if they cannot use them as political pawns. Let's turn to Milwaukee. So what do you think? Milwaukee is an uber Democrat city inside a Democrat-leaning county. And if you look, I utilized data from the Milwaukee Urinal Sentinel, and the child murder victimization rate for the years I covered, 2020 to 2022 in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee's got a lot of black on black homicide. Most counties in Wisconsin are totally safe, but Milwaukee County, and particularly Milwaukee City, not so much. You'd be amazed at all the black on black homicide going on in Wisconsin, but oh, can't talk about that. Blacks murder blacks at a rate 4.5 times that whites murder whites. So you find any large or not so large diverse city run by the Democrats, which has an African American, or black, I should say, I don't like the term African American, has a black majority or plurality, you're going to have a war zone. Milwaukee, child murder victimization rate, 17.478 per 100,000. So young people in Milwaukee are getting murdered at a very high rate. Most of the time they're being murdered by black people, but we don't care. In 2020 and 2021 alone, according to the FBI, of the 305 murder offenders where the race of the offender it was known, over 85% of them were black in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is less than 40% black. Sorry, I hit the mic there. Of the 385 murder victims in Milwaukee, 2020 to 2021, over 84% of them were black. So same story, different diverse city run by Democrats that carnival barkers Joy Reid, AOC, and Sam Seder will not talk about, because black kids getting gunned down. If you can't score political points with it, we're not going to worry about it. Birmingham, Alabama is another chocolate city dominated by Democrats within a so-called red state. Why do I not like red or blue designations? See Reagan's Sea of Blue in 1984. So, from 2021 to 2022, what do you think the juvenile murder victimization rate was in Birmingham, Alabama? Whole bunch of black on black homicide going on there. 26.133 per 100,000. Birmingham is one of the most violent cities in America. 26.133 per 100,000 juvenile homicide victimization rate in Birmingham. So if you've got young black men dying in Birmingham, they're probably being killed by young black men. There was a little 2-year-old black boy. I read through a lot of these, but I didn't write them all down. But this one really, it'll get to you. There was a little 2-year-old black boy named Major Turner that was killed in Birmingham when some hood rats opened fire on the apartment he was staying in. Just sitting there on the couch, and his life is over. Cry some crocodiles' tears for him, Sam Seder, next time you waddle to the fridge in your small apartment for a donut. Many of the murders in Birmingham alert the police because of their shot spotter system, which detects gunfire. You know why they need that? Because there are a lot of unsavory characters stalking the streets of Birmingham, Alabama. You would not believe the number of folks. You remember when Michelle Obama was talking about Barack? He could be shot at a gas station just getting gas. He could just mind his own business. Brock, as a black man, could get shot. Well, reading through these murders in Birmingham, you wouldn't believe the number of folks victimized at gas stations just filling up their car, buying it, whatever it is they drink. Most of the murders where people are arrested, the arrestees are young black males. There's plenty of young black males getting exterminated by other black folks in Birmingham every year. Joy Reid's flabby jowls would be bouncing up and down for hours as she chronicles the barbarism of Birmingham. So young black men in Birmingham, St. Louis, East St. Louis, the police aren't their enemies, and the white folks aren't their enemy. It's other young black males. Joy Reid won't complain about that, though, because she would be profiling young black males for doing the dirty deed and does not score the same number of political points. I digress. A white Marine scores when he finally stops a mentally ill young black man from terrorizing more citizens. How about New Orleans? New Orleans. That is another Democrat-dominated area inside a very red state with a whole bunch of black people killing black people. So what do you think the child homicide victimization rate was in New Orleans? And I was only able to get good data for 2 years. I got it for 2019 and 2021. It's 18.159 per 100,000. Can you believe that? So if a young person gets killed in New Orleans, they probably got killed by a black person. To conclude, here's a song we've heard before from one of the articles. Quote, to conclude my section on New Orleans, the brothers, there's two brothers that got murdered, represent a demographic that makes up nearly 80% of the city's murder victims. Black men, according to reports from NOPD and the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office, tracked by WDSU. Black men make up about 30% of the city's population. Data also shows that half the city's murders happen in 2 of NOPD's 8 police districts, so it's something I've gone over before. Even if you've got a city with a high homicide rate, it's a few neighborhoods. Like most of Chicago is pretty safe, but there's 3 or 4 neighborhoods where it's basically a war zone. Half the city's murders in New Orleans occurred in 2 of the 8 police districts, the 5th and the 7th. Those are made up of 2 predominantly black areas, the 9th Ward and New Orleans East. Hashtag white supremacy. Here's a quote from another article a few years before. An analysis of New Orleans Police Department data, WDSU, conducted sheds light on where and how people were murdered in 2019 and who they were. The data reveal murder victims were overwhelmingly young black men, oh my gosh, and more than half were killed in 2 of the city's 8 police districts, the 7th District and the 5th District, which is made up of the 9th Ward, St. Roch, and most of the 7th Ward. While striking, the data is not surprising. They point to racial and economic inequalities, this is the piece I'm quoting, that have been in place for hundreds of years and stem from deficiencies in education. Of course, that's the Democrats want a train wreck of a public education system to churn out people who are easily manipulated. The soft bigotry of low expectations. So basically, even these nutcases writing for this rag in New Orleans, they're sitting there, oh man, black people are killing black people all over New Orleans. Wonder why that's happening. They're all on welfare. Well, maybe if Daddy would stick around. Because I guarantee New Orleans, prisons in Louisiana are full of black men who never met their father and did not finish school. I guarantee it. And New Orleans school system, there's a train wreck, and it's being done on purpose. And by golly, no matter how big the welfare state gets, the disparities continue. How come Asians have figured this out? Most of the murder victims in New Orleans are also under 40. There's a whole bunch of young black. Okay, I digress. So, why are Asians doing so well? It's amazing, isn't it? How Asians, a minority, they're just leaving everybody in the dust. And I'm Asian, by the way. Indianapolis, Indiana. The 2 years I looked at 2020 through 2022. They have Indianapolis, another Democrat-leaning city inside a Republican-leaning state. Indianapolis in those 3 years had a juvenile murder victimization rate of 6.569 per 100,000. How about Philly? Now Philly, this is massive amounts of black on black homicide there. It's shocking. Juvenile homicide victimization rate in Philly from 2019 and 2020 and 2022. 3 years I could get good data from. 12.771 per 100,000. That's more than 4 times the homicide rate in the entire state of Iowa. Here's another quote from the article, off the cuff here. AOC, are you listening, dumbass? More juveniles were shot in New York City in 2021 than in 2018 and 2019 combined, according to the Wall Street Journal. So, how many videos has the divorcee, the bipolaroid Sam Seder, done when a black male shoots another black male off in the hood in New York City or Philly? Well, he'd be busy, but that, like I said, he's not going to do that. They just get a paragraph in the paper and that's it. Nashville. Here's another Democrat-leaning county, Nashville/Davidson County, inside a very Republican-dominated state. But Nashville in 2021 and 2022 had a child homicide victimization rate of 6.366 per 100,000. Not bad. Durham City, North Carolina, had from 2020 to 2022, this is another Democrat-dominated city inside a Democrat-dominated county that is in a state that leans Republican. Durham City, North Carolina, child murder victimization rate 7.259 per 100,000. Charlotte, North Carolina, same story. The data, I couldn't find out if the teenagers, they had an article talking about 73 children and teens in Charlotte have been shot, 33 lives cut short. But 18-year-old's a teenager, but technically not a juvenile. So, but if I assume those 33 were juveniles, the Charlotte, North Carolina, juvenile homicide victimization rate would be 5.3 or roughly 5.3, 5.4 per 100,000, back of the envelope calculation. According to the FBI, in 2020 and 2021, over 85% of the homicide offenders in Charlotte were black, and Charlotte's only 35.2% black. Ding. Kansas City, Missouri. They had 16 juveniles murdered in 2021 and 9 in 2022, which yields a juvenile homicide victimization rate of 10.774 per 100,000. Kansas City is a very Democrat-leaning city inside a Democrat-leaning county inside a very Republican-dominated state. As I've said before, most of the homicide in Missouri is occurring in Jackson County, St. Louis City, and St. Louis County. The counties that voted 60% or more for the Republican candidates have homicide rates very low, below the national average. It's black-on-black homicide in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Jackson County. Kansas City, more than 80% of the murder offenders in Kansas City are black, and 74% of the victims are black. Kansas City is 26.5% black. Here's Atlanta. What do you think theirs is? In a typical year, more than 90% of Atlanta's murder victims are black in a city that's 48.2% black. So, and over 90% of the murder offenders. So, in Atlanta, from 2020 to 2022, 37 children were murdered, and they have a juvenile homicide victimization rate of roughly 14.148 per 100,000. But we're not going to talk about that. It can't be. That's so for you Democrats listening. That's more than one child a month murdered in Atlanta in those 3 years. But Jordan Neely, hands up, don't shoot. And how many videos has Sam Seder done on young black males being murdered by young black males in Atlanta? Well, 0. Again, according to the FBI, in 2020 and 2021, there were 15,393 black people victimized by homicide. In 2020 and 2021, there were 11,608 white people, and that includes Hispanics, victimized by a homicide. In 2020 and 2021, there were 14,789 black homicide offenders. This is FBI data. In 2020 and 2021, there were 11,065 white homicide offenders. That tells you, remember, blacks are roughly 13.3, 13.2% of the population. According to the FBI, in 2020, there were 1,185 juveniles murdered, and in 2021, it was 1,527, and most of them are black. In closing, if the overweight Joy Reid, the divorcee Sam Seder, and the bartender are concerned about young black folks meeting their maker, they may want to quit whining about white guys on the subway that subdue mentally ill folks who could never hold a real job and never wanted a real job, and maybe, just maybe, concentrate on the rats who abandon their children to the baby mama. I mean, even Sam Seder planned his marriage, so it's obviously not. I mean, he couldn't stay married, obviously, but he at least planned it. And if he can do it, anyone can do it. Doesn't take a lot of brain power if Stan can do it. Most of those children are doomed, and our vaunted government school system is a meat grinder. People go in one end, mentally deficient social justice warriors come out the other. This is the way the Democrats want it, and you are seeing the results of decades of their policies in places like Philly, Chicago, Atlanta, D.C., L.A., Cleveland, Detroit, etc. Hands up, don't shoot was a lie. This latest, quote, whatever the current thing is, end quote, obsession these carnival barkers are focusing on, even if it was legitimate, Jordan Neely's thug tactics eventually reaped karma. This current obsession is a ruse to distract you from the fact that blacks, and in particular, young black men, tend to murder young black men at a rate no other demographic in America even gets close to. Black Lives Matter used the George Floyd fiasco to gin up their base of lunatics, and it cost thousands of black folks their lives. Cooler heads usually prevail, but since the summer of 2020, it hasn't been anything but cool. It has been chaos, and it is particularly bad in diverse cities run by the Democrat Party, and bodies of black folks are piling up, usually at the hands of other black folks. Keep beating the drum. If you like this, pass it on. For every Derek Chauvin, there are thousands of shootings in the hood. Many times a gangbanger is just getting what is called a receipt for his behavior. Other times a young black child is minding their own business, walking home from school, sitting in a car, or on the front porch eating pizza when suddenly they are caught in the crossfire of a drive-by clash. The bipolar divorcee Sam Seder, the bartender AOC, and Joy Reid care not about black folks that are murdered in the hood and get 3 paragraphs in the Philly Inquirer or the Atlanta Journal-Constipation. And then I said, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, but I take that back. Like Columbo or Perry Mason, just one more question, sir. I am back again. I have to give you this information again, just in case someone is watching and they have not heard it before. According to the FBI, the U.S. murder rate 2016 to 2019 was 5.2 per 100,000. 2020 and 2021, it was 6.8 per 100,000. Now, the NIBRS data tells us from 2016 to 2019, this is where we know the race of the offender. 2016 to 2019, there were 23,688 homicide offenders, murder offenders in the U.S., and 56.5% of them were black. From 2016 to 2019, of the 21,695 victims where we know the race of the victim, 51.59% of them were black. Again, blacks are 13.2% of the population. From 2020 to 2021, the NIBRS data gives us 23,034 murder offenders when we know the race of the offender, and of those, 59.5% of them were black. From 2020 to 2021, of the 24,584 victims where we know the race of the victim, 58.5% of them were black. So you can see how the homicide rate shot up. Thousands more black people arrested for homicide, thousands more black people killed. Black Lives Matter got their lunatic base ginned up after George Floyd, and it cost thousands of black people, some of them very innocent, some of them little children minding their own business, cost them their lives. But Joe Biden and the vacuous divorcee Sam Seder think white supremacy is the biggest threat to America. That's like a guard at Auschwitz saying the biggest threat to Jews is Winston Churchill. Finally, I'm done.